Welcome back, Clint here with Butcher Boy down in Reno. Today we're gonna go a little bit more in depth than some steaks we've talked about before. Porterhouses, New Yorks, tenderloins, T-bones. All four of those cuts come out of this one, what we call a primal, a short loin. So you can kind of see we've got a New York over here, we've got the tenderloin here, and then the short loin. That New York right there on one side of the bone, and that tenderloin is gonna be on the other side. So a whole tenderloin like that, part of this is actually gonna be in the sirloin, where it's split right off of that, and then the rest is going to be attached to that. So the difference when you do bone in between a porterhouse and a T-bone is the amount of fillet that you get on there. So the porterhouse comes off of that fat end. On each of those porterhouse steaks you're going to get New York and a good chunk of the tenderloin. When the tenderloin kind of tapers down, as you can see right there, then it becomes T-bones. So at the end you're not going to get much fillet on those T-bones. It's going to be all New York with a bone. Then you're going to get a little bit more fillet until you get to the porterhouse section. So that porterhouse section is great because you get that tenderloin. Honestly, one of my favorite steaks to cut, about 2 inches thick, and do it over the grill. Reverse sear works really good, and then serve it to a group. If you've got 3 or 4 people, a nice big fat porterhouse, ton of meat, 2 different cuts on there, so different textures, different flavors, and just awesome for a group. The one downside on a porterhouse, when you get into that New York side, let me show you. This end right here is the same as that. Let me just face this up here. You're gonna get what we in the industry call a vein steak. So when you go pick out a New York, now on a porterhouse, no way to avoid it. But when you pick out a New York, we call it a vein steak because you can see that back strap right there, right? It runs right down through the middle of it. So the first couple of steaks are always gonna have that. Not that it's bad, you're just gonna have a few chewy bits in there on a New York and on a porterhouse. So when you go to carve that guy up, I always try to take that out before you serve it, just makes it a little bit nicer. But on a New York, we're gonna take most of that back strap out there that we can and give it a nice little trim, like so. But as you can see, with that little vein running through there, we can't really make a nice steak if we cut right through the middle of it. So that's going to be a porterhouse. Again, not a bad steak. Just know when you grab those, you're going to have that little chewy bit. So if you're looking for just a boneless New York, I'll show you what we're going for. Those first couple of steaks, how we cut them, are going to have a bit of that vein. And then as we go down, you'll see right here, that vein's gone. So if you're going for just a New York, look for one that doesn't have that little half circle in there. It's going to be a better choice on the boneless New York. So technically the rest of those would be what you call a center cut New York steak. They don't have that vein on there. The rest of this portion right here would be the same that goes into a T-bone. All right, so the other side of that short loin in that porterhouse section, we've got the New Yorks, which we just cut right on the one side of the bone. And then the other side is going to be the fillet. So this is a whole tenderloin. As I mentioned, this is called the butt end of it. That's going to be on the sirloin. So on the short loin side, we're going to have about that down there. Let's break this down really quick because tenderloin's very wasteful cut for a butcher. Lots of stuff that comes off to get a nice, lean, perfectly cut tenderloin. So the first thing we're going to do is pull off what's called the chain muscle right there. It's super tender, it's tasty. Trim up some of that gristle. It goes into grind. We put some of it into our satays, our Korean beef satays. So again, we don't want to waste any pieces of good meat. And then the rest of that guy we trim up. Take the silver skin off the top here because that's chewy. We don't want that in the most tender steak. And you can see as we get down into this, we're going to be left with just a nice, perfect, super lean, and the most tender cut of beef, or most tender steak on beef. Get all those little bits off, flip it over. We got a little bit of that fat there that comes off. This is the side that's going to be against the bone here in the short loin. So we want to pull any of that velvet off and the fat. So from there, if you want to do a tenderloin roast, Chateaubriand, if you want to make a beef Wellington, anything that's going to use like a larger piece, that's what you want. You want that center cut portion of the tenderloin. It's gonna cook nice and even, get rid of that taper there. So we'll take this part, and that goes into other products for us. Tenderloin tails, awesome if you want to do steak tartare. We've got those in the case all the time. But that right there can be tied up for a roast, seared, put into a Wellington, nice and even, or simply cut into some nice, beautiful fillet steaks. So those are going to be all the parts. Then when we get into this other side of the butt tenderloin, you can see that center muscle right there that we just cut, and then it's got the head muscles. So you can trim that down, makes great steaks as well. Also makes a nice little roast. Lots of good flavor and plenty of meat on that end right there. But let's go ahead and finish up the short loin. We're going to move over to the saw and show you the porterhouses and those T-bones and how they come out. All right, so now we moved over to our big bandsaw here because we're cutting the bone-in steaks, those porterhouses and T-bones. So that first cut, as we talked about with the tenderloin and the New York, our porterhouses we cut about a good 1.5 inches thick. Again, great steak for two or a group. And then once we move down to the T-bones, we're going to get about 3 of those nice thick porterhouses off of this. And then we're going to cut the T-bones a little bit thinner, just change up the portion size. That way the T-bone's good steak for one instead of those big massive porterhouses, right? So simply, we're all trimmed up here, so we're just going to cut this guy. So as you can see, after we cut it on the saw, we've got all this bone dust on there. So basically all that is the fat and the bones as the saw goes through it, right? We want to take that off. Nothing wrong with it, it's all part of the steak, but we don't want it gritty and grainy. So we use our nice little scraper here, pulls all that off, get them nice and cleaned up. Then I'll show you the difference here between that porterhouse and the T-bone. So the difference, these aren't trimmed yet, but porterhouse, you see how much bigger that tenderloin section is than this guy? So T-bone right there, porterhouse, essentially the same steak, you just get more of that filet, and we like to cut them a little bit thicker, just because it makes a great steak for two. So from there, we remove all that excess fat, get them nice and trimmed up here, about a 1/4 inch on the outside. And then again, since we want every steak to be perfect, this little chewy part right here, we're gonna take that off, called the back strap. It's just a really tough little piece. We don't want that on a beautiful steak. That gives you a porterhouse. Same thing on the T-bone. Quick little trim here. Get that back strap portion off. Like so. Make sure all the little bits are where we want them. And boom. In the case all the time. Beautiful porterhouses, beautiful T-bones. I'll say it again just because one of my favorite ways to do that porterhouse, cut it a good couple inches thick. Reverse sear works great. You know, start at low heat, finish it off with a nice hard sear. Carve it off the bone, serve it to a group. Everybody's gonna love you and think you're the steak master. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.